I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. The title of today's webinar is Getting the Most from Your NDIS Plan and Preparing for Your Annual Review. Your presenter is Robin Lang, and she is based in our Sydney office. Your facilitators are Annie Sasson, and I'm the co-facilitator of my training wheels, Catherine Keenan. We always start our webinars with an acknowledgement. We acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians, past and present, on whose lands we meet today. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and the relationship of Aboriginal people to country, and respect the cultural authority of the elders in each community. Just a little bit of introduction to Robin today. Robin Lang is an NDIS advisor. She started her work venture with MS as the Peer Support Coordinator in 2011. In 2014, Robin took on the role of the NDIS Advisor, where she works to help others to understand the significance of the NDIS and its intricacies, the eligibility criteria, the opportunities the scheme offers to help people lead a more ordinary life, the role of local area coordination, and how to request reviews of decisions that potential participants may require. So a wealth of knowledge there. Robin has also developed NDIS resources, including information sheets, frequently asked questions, and webinars and workshops for clients, along with NDI planners and local area coordinators, all of which accumulation of her ongoing learnings of the ever-expanding NDIS space. Robin is very much committed to the concept of the NDIS and helping people get the best possible outcomes from it. So now we're going to hand over the reins to Robin to take charge and fire ahead with the presentation. And as we said, we really welcome questions and we look forward to those throughout the presentation.
So let me just get to the same place we were before. Everyone. Okay. So we're here today to help you to understand the support categories in your plan if you're already a participant in the scheme. We're here to help you understand how to activate and get the most out of that plan, what to do if your circumstances change throughout the life of that 12-month plan, or what to do if the supports in your current plan aren't meeting your current needs, and also how to help you get really well prepared for your annual review, which happens just before the 12-month anniversary of that plan. So we're covering a lot of information today. So at any time, if you've got any questions, as Annie and Catherine said, just type them in and Annie and Catherine will interrupt me, or I'll just pause every so often and just check on any questions. So let's get stuck into it. So within a person's plan, you have different support categories, and the best way to think about them is under the 3 C's. And you have support categories called core supports, capital supports, and capacity building supports. And what I'd like to do is just delve a little deeper into each of those 3 categories. So we're going to start with the core supports that might be in a person's plan. So just to make a very important point here about core supports, this is the most flexible part of a person's plan. You can generally use your core budget funds in one support category to purchase supports under another support category. So that means if you have some money in assistance with social and community participation, because of the flexibility in core supports, you could move it to one of the other 3 areas. There are a couple of provisos about that. So if some of the funds has been set aside for a specific purpose, such as a periodic payment for transport, or a core budget item that is either compensation, something called specialised disability accommodation, or something that has the wording stated item, these funds can only be used for that specific purpose. And you'll see that in the wording in your plan. So don't, it should not be confusing. So all you need to know is if it's compensation, specialised disability accommodation, or a stated item, those funds cannot be transferred or used flexibly. So let's look at assistance with daily living. So I'll just give you a couple of examples, and this is not exhaustive. So it might be things like personal activities, assistance with household tasks, maybe the preparation and delivery of meals. And just remember there that in terms of the preparation and delivery of meals, the NDIS pays for that preparation and delivery, but they don't pay for the cost of the actual food that you are getting. And the other thing that sits under assistance with daily living is something called short-term accommodation, but you might know it more in the old terms of respite. So let's look at transport allowance. So most people, if you are transitioning across to the NDIS, and if you had a mobility allowance in the past, generally, as a rule, you'll get some transport allowance in your plan. And there are 3 levels under the NDIS, and I'll just quickly talk about them. Level 1 in transport allowance is around $1,600. And that's generally for participants who are not working, studying, or attending day programs, but are wanting to enhance their community access so that there's some, for instance, some isolation, you're unable to get out because of your inability to use public transport, then you would get a transport allowance of around $1,600. Level 2 of the transport allowance is around $2,400 per year for the participant, and it's for those participants who are currently working or studying part-time up to 15 hours a week, or are participating in day programs, and for other social, recreational, or leisure activities. And level 3, that's up to $3,400, and that would be for participants who are currently working or looking for work, who are studying for at least 15 hours a week, and they're unable to use public transport because of their disability. In terms of assistance with social and community participation, that's funds for that participation in a centre or in an open activity. And consumables is, and this is a really important one for people living with MS, it's used for your continence equipment and for, and this is much less or much rarer, it's HEN, which is home enteral nutrition. I just want to flick back to continence equipment under that consumables label. In the past, people who were receiving assistance with their continence equipment through something called the CAPS program, that used to be in the old system capped at around $500 to $600 a year. Under the NDIS, people's continence equipment is not capped at any price, so that if you know that you buy, for instance, continence pads at the supermarket or through Bright Skies or Independence Australia, you actually get the funds you need for that 12-month period. It's not capped at the $500. So that's a great change under the NDIS. Annie, I'll just pause here for a moment just to see whether anyone has any questions before I move on to the next slide.
Okay, no questions at this stage yet, Robin. However, we've had someone say that they're not able to hear, and I'm just trying to work out, Catherine and I are trying to work out if it's an isolated incident. I'm assuming that everyone else is hearing us okay. We've only had the one person comment on the sound. If anyone else is having trouble hearing or having issues, I guess they would have written to us by now.
Okay, so you don't want me to pause any just while you get some feedback?
Perhaps, yes, those that can hear us, if you can type in and let us know if you're hearing us okay, or if there are any issues with the sound or anything like that. So a reminder again, in the control panel, you'll see the questions pane. You click on that arrow, it opens up a box, and all should be okay to type in your question in that box. All right, we've received word that all is good from a couple of people, so that's great. Thank you for responding, and we'll try and sort out the other issue while Robin continues. Thanks, Robin.
Okay, thanks, Annie. So let's look at capital supports. Capital supports relate to supports such as assistive technology or modifications to your home, and they depend on quotes from suppliers. So funds within this budget can only be used for their specific purpose. And within capital supports, the capital supports budget, there are two categories. One is assistive technology, and that includes a wide range of equipment from things like equipment items for mobility, for personal care, communication and recreation. That might include things like wheelchairs, a shower chair, a walker, or even vehicle modifications. Under home modifications, that might include things like ramps, so that you've got better access in and out of your home or within your home. Grab rails, and that might be at steps, or it might be grab rails next to your toilet or in your shower area. It might include things like door widening, so that if you've got you're using a large wheelchair and your doors are not wide enough for you to access some parts of your home, it might include some funds to get the doors widened. And it also includes modifications for bathrooms. So they're just some of the areas that some of that home modification funds can be spent. The dollars for home modifications are only in your plan once the National Disability Insurance Agency has received a report from an occupational therapist making recommendations about what needs to happen, why it needs to happen, in terms of the reasonable and necessary supports you need to remain living in your own home. So let's look at capacity building. This has got 9 categories, and I'll just give you some examples under each of the categories, but again, it's not exhaustive. So capacity building funding is allocated across those 9 support categories that you can see on the screen. This has some flexibility, but not as much as your core supports, the first one we talked about. So you can choose how to spend these funds to purchase any approved individual support within its category, but you couldn't move funding from one category to another. So if you got some funds for finding and keeping a job, you couldn't move it across into improved relationships, for instance. So I'm just going to run through each of the ones that you can see on your screen. So let's look at finding and keeping a job. So that is basically assistance to obtain or to retain employment in the open or supported labour market. Improved living arrangements could be things like helping to obtain or retain appropriate accommodation. Increased social and community participation. So this might include things like skills-based learning, such as art classes, sports coaching. It includes tuition fees. Support coordination. This is an important one for people living with MS, especially if they have significant cognition issues, because the support is there to help you to understand and activate your plan in the best possible way to make sure that you're making the most of the funds in your plan. And support coordination is also there for you to have assistance one-on-one with a support coordinator to make sure that you're happy with your service providers and that you're well prepared at the before your 12-month plan is due for renewal, that you're well prepared for that plan review conversation. So support coordination is a wonderful tool for those people who struggle to understand their NDIS plan.
Excuse me, Robin, can I just interrupt with a question from one of the participants today?
Yep.
Catherine,
yes.
Yeah. I've got a question from Mary, and she's had a OT form that's been sent for a scooter for herself, and she had that review 6 months ago or more, but hasn't heard back. Have you got any advice for Mary on that, or other people listening?
Yeah, I do. Mary, unfortunately, that is not an uncommon story, that people are waiting extended periods of time for pieces of equipment. The best thing I can say to you at this stage is just briefly is that unfortunately the squeaky wheel gets the most attention. So I would be making sure that you regularly contact the NDIS and ask them about the progress of that OT report and recommendation for that piece of equipment. I would be diarising every time you ring the agency, and I would be making sure that when you call the agency that you make sure that the person that you're speaking to puts a note on your file that you have made that call. And if you are still struggling and you're still not getting anywhere in terms of any progress on that decision, then you've got a couple of things that you can do. You can either make a complaint to the NDIS, and they have a complaint mechanism. You can, and I have to preface this by saying I understand everything I'm saying is difficult for people who are living with MS and trying to manage their MS and their fatigue and all sorts of other things in their life. So apologies, I don't want to be glib about what you need to be doing. The other thing that we know people sometimes gets things moving is if they can make it very clear to the person on the phone at the NDIS about any risks that you might have if you don't have that piece of equipment. So risks to health, risks to you staying in your own home, risks to carers who might need to be doing physical activities like helping with transfers or lifting because you don't have the right piece of equipment. And also getting in touch with your local federal member. And as we're heading into a federal election, now is a good time to be making it clear to your federal member that you are not happy with the NDIS and you're not happy with the response from them in terms of getting equipment and you being able to lead an ordinary life. So I'm sorry, that's a very long answer to your question.
Thank you for that, Robin. I think it's a very comprehensive answer, and for Mary, it gives a good plan going forward and some strategies to take control of that situation. So thank you very much, and thank you, Mary, for your questions. And
I'll just add quickly, Mary, I've actually just blurted out a whole lot of information, and if you don't remember it all, which is perfectly understandable, you can give MS Connect a call and tell them about your situation, and they will probably put you through to one of our NDIS engagement team, and they might be able to help you just just go through that information again and see what help we can provide you with in terms of making it things happen a bit faster. Okay. And sorry, Robin, just on a final note with that for Mary, you've given her the number to MS Connect, which is fabulous. She just had a question as you mentioned, I think, talking to the NDIS and keep making profile and doing the squeaky wheel. Do you have a number that she can ring for that, to the NDIS? Yes, I do, and Mary, if you've got a pen, I'll give it to you now. And if you don't, I think the number's on one of the slides further on, but I'll give it to everyone now anyway. It is 1-800 800 110. So that's the NDIS. Excellent, and as we said, it'll be in a slide later on, so she'll be able to pick it up from there as well. So thank you. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So I think we got up to support coordination. I'll move on to improved relationships. And this is specialised assessments for complex needs or for someone requiring long-term or intensive support to address any behaviours of concern. Improved health and well-being. This is physical well-being activities including personal training, exercise physiology to increase or maintain physical mobility. It also includes dietetics and allied health assessments, a very important category for people living with MS. Improved learning, that's things like skills training, advice and assistance with arrangements. Improved life choices, and this is where plan management funds sit, as well as building financial skills, organisational skills and self-management skills. I don't want to give you too much, I don't want to overload everybody, but plan management funds is where you've received funds in your plan so that someone actually manages all the payment of the bills for you, the invoicing, and helping you to keep track of your budget. Another important one for people living with MS. Finally, we have improved daily living, And that's things like assessments, training, and the development or increase in skills for independence and community participation. And that could be in groups or it could be individually. So that's capacity building supports, and that's the 3 categories that you'll generally find funds in your plan. So I want to look now at the best way of understanding and getting that plan activated. And there are 2 places that people go to in terms of receiving that assistance. Somebody might have the assistance of their local area coordinator, commonly called an LAC, or they may have funds in their plan for something called support coordination. And that's where you have more intensive one-on-one assistance to help you to get your plan activated, to understand the support categories and make the most out of your plan for that funds for that year. I want to look in some detail at each of these people and the sorts of services that they provide you so that you can understand what they're doing for you. And if they're not doing it, you can be more confident to ask them to help you. So let's look at a local area coordinator and how they should be helping you. And if they're not doing these things, this is something you can ask them to be doing. And this is only when you don't have support coordination funds in your plan. So a local area coordinator helps all those people who don't have support coordination funds. Your local area coordinator is there to connect you to the NDIS portal. They are there to help you understand your plan and the funding in it and how you can spend those funds. They're also there to help you in a superficial way, I think, to choose and connect with the service providers. They're also there to help you to find mainstream and community services. So your NDIS plan has funds in it, and that will help you to a large degree to perhaps lead a more ordinary life. But the local area coordinators are also there to help link you up with those mainstream supports and services that have been there since Adam was a boy and which you might need to connect with. So things like a community health centre, a local library, courses in the community that you might be interested in doing, just those mainstream supports and services that don't actually have any funding attached to them. Your local area coordinator should also be helping you at least 6 to 8 weeks before your plan is due for renewal to get ready for your plan review. And you can also ask your local area coordinator help you if you want a review of your plan before the 12 months is up, or if there has been a change of circumstances for you. So if your MS has progressed, if you've had a relapse, if you've moved homes and you've got a higher level of need, or your informal support networks have changed and you need more support. So that's what your local area coordinator should be doing for you. Very important. Do you know who your local area coordinator is? If you don't, then you need to, one of the things that you can do is call us at MS, call through to MS Connect, our frontline service, and either they can help work out who your LAC provider might be, or if they're unable to do so, then they'll put you through to one of our engagement team. And then we can help you reconnect with your local area coordinator and help you understand on a one-to-one level what that LAC should be doing for you and give you the confidence that you might need to ask them to come back out and help you if you're struggling. Annie and Catherine, any questions?
No, we don't have any questions at the moment, Robin, but as we've said throughout the webinar, we really encourage you to type a question. And that, again, just to remind people, that's by using the control panel on the right-hand side to maximise that and look down to where the question box is. Any question would be useful, any small question, large question, any question in between.
Thank you, Catherine, that's great.
Okay, so we've done local area coordinators. So the other people that are there to help you understand and activate your plan are support coordinators. And as I said, you can't use that support coordinator unless you have those funds in your plan. So it's very important to look carefully through your plan to see if you can see those words support coordinator. So your support coordinator is much more intensive help than an LAC. So they do things like help you understand and action your plan. And they will be working with you much more on a one-on-one basis. They will hopefully help to build capacity to manage your plan yourself in the future, and to link up and liaise with the service providers that you want to use in terms of the funds that you have. They will also help to coordinate all your informal, your funded, and your mainstream supports. And again, they're there to help you prepare for your annual review. Much more hands-on than an LAC, much more one-on-one intensive support. People who generally get support coordination funds in their plan, and I'm talking about people here who are living with MS, not other people in the NDIS, but people who generally get support coordination are those people living with MS who might be experiencing quite a high level of cognitive impairment. A person living with MS who has very few or no informal supports to help them to get their plan activated, somebody who might have English as a second language, somebody else who might have limited access to IT, so to either a smartphone or a laptop, so an inability to get onto the portal. And somebody who, because of their MS, has quite a complex situation in terms of not only working within the disability sector, but maybe has complex needs through health, through maybe employment, education, the justice system, the housing department. So somebody that fits into each of those things is much more likely to get support coordination than someone else. Okay. So I want to move now on to plan reviews, because they're very important. Every year, somebody, most people choose to have their plans roll over every year. And so that's called a scheduled plan review. That happens just before the 12-month anniversary. But before you get to that, there are some unscheduled plan reviews. And this gets a bit meaty and it can be quite confusing. Hopefully I can step you through it so that you can understand the different types of unscheduled plan reviews. So within unscheduled plan reviews, there are 3 types. There's the first one, which is a request for a review of a reviewable decision. A request for a review because there has been a change of circumstances. So as I said before, if there's been a change of circumstances, like you've had a progression of your MS, you're having quite a bad relapse, you've moved homes, or your informal care arrangements have changed, that would be when you request a review because your circumstances have changed. Then the second one, yes?
Sorry, you're on to your second point. I thought there was a breather in there, Robin. Do you want me to ask that question now, or do you want to carry on with your point too?
No, let's ask it. Let's ask it.
Okay, we've had a question from Mary, and I think what Mary is asking is about whether exercise physiology is covered in the plan. She has a wonderful LAC, but just thought she'd ask while she was on here whether that is an area that can be covered in the NDIS plan.
Yes, it can. So lots of people get funds for exercise physiology. And Mary, that's a perfect question to go back to your, I'm glad to hear that your LAC is wonderful. I would be going back to your LAC if you want to get the services of an exercise physiologist, but what you will first have to check with your LAC is that you've got the right funding in your plan for that. So she'll be able to help you work out which part of your plan you can pull that funding from. So without seeing your plan, I can't give you a definitive answer, apart from to say lots of people use some of their funds for exercise physiology, and you just need to check with your LAC where that money can come from, potentially, in your plan.
Oh, excellent, Robin. That's fantastic that it is available, and she can discuss that further with her LAC, and for everyone else who's listening has found that out also. Thank you.
Yeah. And further to that point, I think under point 2 here, review of a reviewable decision. If your plan doesn't reflect the supports and services you need to achieve your goals and to lead an ordinary life, you can ask for a review of the funding in that plan. There is a proviso on this, though, that generally the review of a reviewable decision, and I have to apologise for that label, but it's theirs, not mine. It has to be, you have to put in that request for a review within 12 weeks of receiving your plan, so within 3 months of receiving your plan. The final unscheduled review is the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and that's an external body. And the tribunal is there if you want to dispute any outcome from an internal review within the agency. So I'm just going to pick these apart one by one. So let's look at a request for a review. Your circumstances have changed. You've moved house. So maybe you've moved house and you need some wraps and rails put in, or your bathroom is not accessible, or you need a path that goes, say, from your back door out to your clothesline. That is when you would put in a request for a review because your circumstances have changed. Equally, if your informal supports have changed, you could request a review. That might be, for instance, because you've had some family members who have been at home, say a young adult who has been at university, they're working part-time, they've done some things around the house for you, and you've both been happy with that arrangement, but that person might have moved out of home and you're now struggling to get some of those tasks done. So, so your partner was working part-time and has gone to full-time work and you need a high level of supports. If your MS has progressed or if you've had a relapse. So this is when you put in for that request for a review because your circumstances have changed. What do? There's obviously a form, and you can go to the NDIS website to download that form. You complete the change of circumstances form. It's always very good. If you want a good outcome from that request, you have to evidence why you're requesting it. So if you can attach any relevant reports, any assessments, any support letters, that will help the NDIA make a decision on why you're asking for a higher level of funds. I always tell people to make a copy and keep a copy of all the documents you send in, because sometimes there is a black hole that is the NDIS where forms get lost, and you don't want to have to go back to an occupational therapist or back to your GP or back to somebody who's given you a support letter to get them to rewrite it, because it's just a pain in the neck. So if you've got copies of your documents, and if they get lost within the system, you can always just resend them. You then submit the form to the NDIS, and if you submit the form by email, it obliges them to respond within 2 weeks, and that's only responding to say they have received it. It's not responding to say they've made a decision, but at least you know that they have received it and it's now in the system. Keep in mind here that your local area coordinator, or if you have the funds in your plan, your support coordinator can help you to complete that change of circumstances form. As we talked about, the second one is a request for a review of a reviewable decision if you think that the funds in your plan are not meeting your needs. And that has to happen, as I said, within 3 months or 12 weeks of you receiving your plan. There again is a form called the request for a review of a reviewable decision form, and that can be downloaded from the NDIS website. Again, and it's really important here, if they've already set aside money for you and you're not happy with it and you're asking for more money, you need to be able to evidence why you want more money, how the decision, how the funding that you've received is not meeting your needs and how that's affecting you. Again, make and keep copies of all documents you send to the NDIS and submit that form to them. And again, your local area coordinator or your support coordinator can help you. Things to consider to make sure that you're going to get the best possible outcome for when you're requesting higher funds because of change of circumstances or because you believe the funds in your plan don't meet your needs. You always have to ensure that your request relates to your goals. So if one of your goals is to stay living in your own home safely and independently, and that home is clean and well maintained, if you can evidence that you don't have enough funds in your plan for you to reach that goal, that will help your argument. Always explain how you will be impacted if your request is rejected. So it could be you're requesting more funds because your partner has gone from part-time work back to full-time work. So you could explain that if you don't get the extra funds, your partner might have to return back to part-time work to provide you the care that you need, and that is going to jeopardize their employment. It's going to maybe jeopardize your ability to pay your mortgage or manage other finances. So you've got to explain how you're going to be impacted, and put your request in the perspective of the economic and community participation, which is the bedrocks of the scheme. So if you can address each of those when you're requesting either more funds or a change to your funds because of your change of circumstances, you're much likely to get a better outcome. So lots of people get their requests are rejected. And sometimes we have no idea why not, but sometimes we do. If you were unclear about how your circumstances had changed, so if you weren't clear about how they'd changed, they might make the decision not to provide additional funds. If you just wanted or rather than needed an increase in support, so say you wanted more supports because you knew Joe Bloggs down the road had gotten something and you felt you wanted it as well, unless you can explain why it's needed and why it's necessary, they won't increase the funding in your plan. If your request could be met by mainstream, community or informal supports, the NDIS will make a decision that they are not going to put those funds into your plan, or if you didn't provide sufficient evidence to support your request. So they're some of the main reasons why requests get rejected. So let's look at the third of the unscheduled plan reviews. So this is the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and this is kind of the last resort. You can request an Administrative Appeals or AAT review if you disagree with the outcome from your request for a review of a reviewable decision. You need to submit the request to the AAT within 28 days of receiving the decision from the NDIA. So say you put in your request for a review because there weren't enough funds in your plan. The decision came back via a letter that they had looked at your request and decided that they weren't going to increase the funds in your plan. You only have 28 days in which to make contact with the AAT. You can fill out an AAT form, or you can write them a letter. And for more information, you can call them on that 1-800 number on the screen, or you can visit their website. And because I know Annie handed out these slides previously, you will have this as a record and you can go back to it if you ever need it. So having looked at the request for reviews, either through the change of circumstances or requesting a review because your funds don't meet your needs, it's really important to understand how the NDIS makes decisions on what they will fund and what they won't. And it's all based around the NDIS Act of 2013, and it's called reasonable and necessary supports. So these are their words, not ours. And I just want to pull this apart a bit for you, because I think if you understand what the agency or what the NDIS sees as reasonable and necessary, you'll have a better idea of whether or not it's worthwhile putting in a request for review. So the NDIS looks at everybody's informal networks, And they will look at your informal networks and make a decision based on what they think it's reasonable that they would provide you with. So everyone, I guess, in the community, or most people in the community, have some sort of informal network of family or friends. And there are certain things that we all agree that family and friends might do for us just as a matter of course, that we would all consider to be reasonable. There are some supports that are not reasonable to expect your informal networks to do. Nobody would expect that a child would have to miss school days because they're caring for a person living with a disability. Nobody would consider it reasonable that a child or young person should help a dependent with personal care like showering or toileting or dressing. So they will look at who is in your network, what they are doing for you, and if it's not reasonable, they feel that it's not reasonable that they provide that high level of care, they will drop funds into your plan to make sure that that's covered and that informal network no longer has to do it. They also make sure that the reasonable and necessary funds that they put in your plan are value for money. And we should all be happy about this because the NDIS is funded through taxpayer dollars. So we all pay our taxes one way or another, and we all expect that the supports and services that people receive from the government, no matter what they are, represent value for money. So that's pretty much a given. The NDIS will only provide funded supports in somebody's plan if they assist them to pursue their goals and aspirations. And that's why a person's goals are so important, because nobody will get funded supports in their plan if it doesn't help them meet their goals. While saying that, a person's goals can change. So if your goals change from one plan to another, that is not a problem. But the funded support you receive will reflect your goals and what supports you need to actually achieve them. All the funded support somebody receives in your plan are there to help to facilitate social and economic participation of people living with a disability. Because what we know is people living with disability are much more likely to be isolated and less likely to be able to participate on an economic level because they're managing that. Well, they're not managing to make their finances meet the needs that they have in terms of the supports that they have. So the funds that you receive are there to help you to participate more fully, both economically and socially. Of course, the funded support somebody receives in their plan, in terms of being reasonable and necessary, need to be effective and beneficial for the participant, and they need to be evidenced. So a support would be put in place, a funded support would be put in place if the NDIS believes that it's going to be beneficial for you. And as Mary said before, she was hoping to get exercise physiology. If somebody's exercise physiology makes them more independent, makes them more able to transfer, to walk about their home safely, to move about their community, that is obviously going to be effective and beneficial for you. So that is why that support might be put in place for you. And the final cog in this wheel is funded supports will only be provided through the NDIS if they're most appropriately funded through the NDIS. So the NDIS is not a silver bullet that takes on board the responsibilities of other sectors within the community. So the NDIS is very clear about where their boundaries lie. They will not pay for medications. They will not pay for GP visits. And that's because they believe that falls under the health sector. It doesn't fall under disability sector. Equally, there are some supports and services that the NDIS believes need to be the responsibility of housing or the employment sector or the education sector. And that's not to say they don't work together, but they will not pay for things that should be paid for under another sector in mainstream supports. So that's what reasonable and necessary means, and I hope that helps you to understand the decisions the NDIS makes on what they're going to, the funds they're going to put into a person's plan. Catherine and Annie, I know I've been talking for a while. I'll just do a quick check-in.
Thanks, Robin. No, we don't have any other questions at the moment, but watch this space.
Okay, I'll keep going.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was the 3 unscheduled plan reviews. Now I want to talk to you about scheduled plan reviews. These generally occur on a yearly basis prior to the end of your plan date. So within the NDIS, they recognise, especially for people living with progressive neurological disorders like MS, that your disease may progress, and that's one of the really good things about the NDIS. There is this mechanism every year for your plan to be reviewed to see whether it's still meeting your needs and for the funds to change as your needs change. This scheduled plan review is generally conducted by your local area coordinator or by an NDIA planner. They can occur face-to-face or over the phone or in an NDIS office, but I have to emphasise here, it is your choice. We generally advise that having a planning conversation over the phone for most people living with MS is difficult, and most people we know are not getting the best outcomes when it is held over the phone. But if that's the way you want to go, it is absolutely your choice. The purpose of this scheduled plan review that happens every 12 months is to discuss your goals, to see if you met your goals for that year, whether or not they've changed. The purpose is also to identify any unmet needs you may now have and to make changes to the funding in your plan if it is required. So plans are not static and they don't look the same year on year. So like with that initial planning conversation that people have when they just before they get their very first plan, what we know is people who are well prepared for their annual review meeting are much more likely to get a plan. And so there are things that you can do to be really well prepared for that annual review. And I just want to run through some of the things that might help you. So be well prepared. List your goals. Look at the goals that are in your goals will be listed in your plan, and look at the funded supports that you're receiving. So let's say one of your goals was to stay living independently in your own home, and you got some funded supports for home modifications, for domestic assistance and personal assistance. Have a think to yourself about whether those supports met that goal of you being able to stay living independently in your own home. And if not, or if you were struggling, what were those barriers? Did you have enough funds? What would help you to reach that goal more? And that goal can be ongoing from year to year. So look at each goal, look at your funded supports and maybe make some notes around them so that when you come to your planning meeting, you can refer back to them and you're really well prepared and you're not going to feel anxious or feel like you're going to forget some important point. Have a think about whether you used all the funding in your plan. And if you didn't use all the funding in your plan, why was that? You need to remember that quite often, if you haven't used all the funding in your plan, it doesn't roll over. There's no point in hanging on to it thinking, oh, I'll keep it for next year, just in case things get worse. You don't need to do that because if things change, you know you've got your change of circumstances form that you can fill out. So use the funds that you've got within that 12-month period if you need them. Of course, if you've got too much money in your plan and you don't use them all, then don't use them. It would just be wasteful to use something if you didn't need it. So I've just made a little list, and this again is not exhaustive, but do you have any unmet needs? So I've just put down some things here that you might need to think about. Do you have any unmet needs about home mods or equipment, help around the house? Were you able to get out and participate in the community? Do you feel like you not only maintained but improved your health and fitness? I mean, you need to be a bit aspirational about this. We don't want to just maintain. If possible, we want to improve. You know, how is your continence going? Did you struggle with getting your plan activated? Do you think you need support coordination? Do you need to think about how your funds are managed, and do you need plan management funds in your next plan? So just have a look at that little list there and maybe make some notes if you think that it's relevant for you. So again, as I said before, your goals are the bedrock of your plan. No supports or services will be put in place if they're not directly linked to your goals. So did you achieve your goal? Sometimes you might not have, and that's okay, or you might have partially met it because it's a long-term goal, or you might have fully met it and you might want to change it next year because you've ticked it off and you want to move on. And as I said before, think about what the barriers were if they weren't achieved, because that will then inform what supports and services you need the following year. Do you have any new goals? You can change your goals. And sometimes it's good to chat to family and friends because, you know, it's a good idea to bounce your ideas off other people. Make sure you write them down, because it's all very well to have a think about them, but I think for all of us, having something written down is much better, and keeping it handy so that when you have that annual planning review, you can refer to them. You're going to get a much better outcome if you've got notes jotted down. Oh, I just want to go back for a minute, sorry. Always remember that your local area coordinator is there to help you to be well prepared for your annual review and to help you put together maybe some evidence about how the supports that you received during that year, how they've helped you. So if you received some funding and you used it for a physio or for a continence assessment or for exercise physiology, you could get the person who provided you with that support to write a little report about what they provided, how it helped you, and what you need going forward. So then that helps the local area coordinator or the NDIA planner to understand what you need in your next year. So having evidence from your service providers is really important when you're coming up for your annual review. So I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that a bit earlier on. So I just wanted to give you the contact numbers here for MS Connect, because if you've got any questions, I've talked a lot today. We've talked for nearly an hour and I've given you a lot of information. So if you don't remember it all, you can always just call MS Connect and one of our NDIS engagement team will call you back and talk through any questions you have. And you can always call the NDIS and ask them any questions you have about your plan as well. So Annie, and Catherine, do I want to hand back to you for the, oh no, I guess I've got, I want to slip over this one because I think we've got another slide further on, Annie and Catherine, that has more supports that we provide as a registered provider. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Robin.
Okay, I'm going to, yep. Okay, this is my last slide, everybody, and then I'll hand back to Annie and Catherine. It's a final hint. And again, I'll just say that I understand that this takes a lot of energy and it's probably energy you don't want to expend on it. But if you feel like you're hitting your head against a brick wall and you can't make any headway with the NDIA or with your local area coordinator, there are other people other than MS who can help you. It could be a disability advocacy agency or your local federal member. So please remember, as a last resort, they're really good people that can help you. Thanks, Annie. Thanks, Catherine. I think that's me, unless there are any questions.
Thanks very much, Rob.